Well, we're going to go ahead and begin. We just want to conclude what has been a stellar day. Come on, give it up. It has been a stellar day. We want to place two bookmarks. I would like to put two bookmarks before us before we begin our time of discussion. This whole movement for reparations began as General Sherman did his famous march toward the sea with thousands of our ancestors following in behind him. Special Order 15 was given that lands would be confiscated from former slave owners, given to newly freed slaves, and he left it up to Congress to award them the official titles for the land. And therein lied the mistake, because Congress did not support the special order. Lands that were confiscated and given to African Americans were then taken away from them. And then when King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and told the country that we had been given a bad check, I believe ADOS has called forth a similar moment, where we are letting the nation know that what was promised, what was given, that was bad, will not be allowed. And we have come to take what is ours and to make demands that justice be done for the American descendants of slavery. And we have a stellar panel with us who are going to help us to just go over some of the things that we've talked about. We're going to answer some questions, but we want to begin with Josh Poe, who is a member of the Simmons team and does outstanding work in the area of redlining. And so Josh, we're going to begin with you. Then we're going to take some questions and just talk specifically about the mandate for reparations. Josh, glad to have you with us.
Thank you, it's great to be here. A lot of people already know my work here, but I'm a housing justice activist, geographer, and city planner, and was part of a group of people that started researching redlining around 2012, 2013, actually, unearthing the historical maps. And if you paid attention to that, one of the things that's happened is the work around redlining has been historicized to a certain point, and some of the researchers have really done a disservice to actually contextualizing what redlining actually was and what it actually is. And so when I talk about redlining, I'm really talking about racial capitalism. I'm talking about what happened in 1924 with the federal government making black bodies a contagion to wealth creation, a detriment to property values, and then locking people out of the ability to accumulate capital. So everything that Zarina talked about today that's happening with gentrification is still a form of redlining. It's still a form of racial capitalism, and it's a form of racial banishment. And that's the language that I use to describe it. And I spend a lot of time in front of wealthy white philanthropists talking about these things. And what happens in those conversations is you sort of realize that you get so far into philanthropy that the people who could, who are in a position to fund solutions are so complicit in the problem that you can't get to any solutions. So through years of just mapping census data and sort of thinking about ways out of this, I came to the conclusion sort of around 2014, 2015, that there's no way out of this without a massive redistribution of wealth. Right? So if we think about Louisville, and my work has become very hyper-local. My grandfather was a farmer. He always said, like, pay attention, study your own farm, and then, and then get with other farmers, and you can share information. So in West Louisville, which is, the black area of Louisville, 75% of all the black people in Jefferson County live on less than 5% of the land, which is West Louisville. So that's a form of racial banishment. That's a form of isolation. The median income in West Louisville is about $22,000 a year. Right? So we actually had a meeting with the mayor and his staff last week and really tried to contextualize that and what that meant, because we're trying to shift housing subsidies to the lowest income people to stop the massive increases in homelessness that we're getting ready to have. And what the mayor and his staff said is well, we can't build homeless shelters. And for me, I didn't realize just how unaware and how callous our public officials are to the problems of poor black people in our city. Right? And how the narratives around actual black income in our city are so erased that we have a narrative that we can just build wealth through homeownership, but you can't purchase a home if you make $22,000 a year. So there's a group. So at the same time, and this is all functioning sort of in this neoliberal landscape, right? So if we think about public housing, in 1978, the HUD budget for public housing was $83 billion. By 1983, it's $18 billion. By 1993, it's zero. So we destroyed public housing through starving out public funding, right? At the same time, in 1993, the World Bank publishes a report called Housing, Enabling Markets to Work. And that was a neoliberal program to take public subsidies and mobilize them for the private sector. So we're giving land in black communities over to private developers, right? And what you have in that setting are territorial regimes of private control. Right. And police function differently in that sort of landscape, and NGOs function differently in that sort of landscape. And as we move to this neoliberal concept, you sort of have to ask yourself, what is the role of poor black people in that situation? So there's a lot of money being made by NGOs right now in that situation. Yeah. And I think we need to really sort of call out some of these problematic NGOs as a form of soft power, as a form of counterinsurgency to pacify people and really quell the dissent around what's happening. So in thinking about reparations, when we work with young people, we're teaching young people how to do investigations. We're teaching young people how to investigate developers. We're teaching young people how to investigate real estate scams. We're teaching young people how to file Freedom of Information Act over land that's being given to private developers. But one thing I ask young people is always think about how your narrative can be co-opted and develop strategies to prevent that from being co-opted. Because we see that a lot with Yvette, but in the way Yvette and Antonio describe reparations, and then there's this sort of softer language around it that's not actually reparations. Right. So I don't know if anybody was here when the mayor gave his speech today. This morning he talked about a program called Lean Into Louisville, right? Lean Into Louisville is a program to educate people about historic discrimination, and it consists of public art, talking circles, and community conversations. Right. That happened into response some work that myself and activists were doing around having real authentic conversations about redistributing wealth in this city, right? So there's always counter narratives that pop up around these topics that really lack substance, that really lack any authenticity, but they service this sort of moral redemption for white supremacy in discussing systemic oppression. So in thinking about that, I want to connect and challenge people here that when you go back to your cities, file those Freedom of Information Act requests. Find out what developers are getting free land in your cities. Find out how NGOs are getting public subsidies in your city. Expose the real estate scams. Expose how a lot of those developers have code violations in black neighborhoods, and elevate those things and try to shut that down and lift the lid off of it to sort of stop the bleeding while political organizing is done to push for reparations at a different level.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you, John. We are so fortunate here at the ADOS conference to have a brain trust like this gathered together. And what we want to do is we want to maximize the time that we have them. So we're not going to take questions from the audience, but we have a ton of questions that have already been turned in. And I will just pose those questions to the panelists, and they'll be able to respond. And that'll give them an opportunity to address a lot of different questions. And I'm going to begin with the question to Yvette. The question is this: do you think and believe that taking money from liberal donors is a good idea?
Liberal white donors or just liberal donors? It just says liberal donors.
I'm assuming liberal white donors.
Okay. It becomes a problem, and it exposes a problem at the same time. It exposes a problem because we should be able to take money from our own group and be okay, and not have to do that. And so it exposes the lack of wealth. And the other problem that it has is, and that's why Antonio and I always talk about we haven't taken money from anybody, is that this sort of movement that we're doing can only be led by free black people.
That's right. That's right.
It can only be led by ADOS people that are free from the puppet strings. And no money is free. All money costs you something. When you talk about, when Antonio was talking about Comcast, that's the reason that we can't get our black organizations that are supposed to represent us because Comcast is paying them to shut up.
They ain't free black.
So if somebody's paying you to shut up, and I don't have any money to give you, even though you're supposed to represent me, you don't represent me because somebody else is paying all your bills.
You're on the earthly board.
Yep, on the board, and that's why you're on the board. You're on the board to pay the bills. So what happens if all the money comes from, I'm not saying you can't get money. I'm not saying that like any other organization, regardless of what organization it is, because we don't have money, so you have to get money, a lot of people from somewhere else. I'm not saying that. I'm not criticizing anybody who does. I'm just saying that it takes a really smooth person to be able to maintain who they are. And that's kind of why I respect Dr. Cosby so much. Because he's been able to maintain a black church, a black institution, be black-led and unapologetically ADOS, and still be able to navigate within those circles, but still as a free person. I'm telling you, I don't see that every day. Most of the time, you just bought and paid for. I don't see that. And so, for me, in terms of my space, I'm at a space right now where I don't have to do that. I can be just, because I'm just YouTube. I'm not running institutions. I'm not feeding black people. Right? I'm feeding you spiritually, but I don't have to put food on you. I'm not putting food on your plate right now. Like this is advocacy. This is a political thing. So I think you have to be very careful because all money has a cost, and people are going to show up for it. People are going to show up for what they want.
Thank you. Antonio, how can we present ADOS position to the youth that believes in crystals and spells to create a bridge and make the idea popular to them, since this is what drives their interests?
So, as you guys all know, I coined the term the decadent veil. What that describes is the fact that we believe black celebrity presents some kind of alternate universe where black folks got reparations. What this question goes to when he talks about spells is the spell of the decadent veil. It is the belief that Jay-Z is a billionaire that controls and owns himself in the same way that Byron is. And I guess what we have to do is awaken everybody to the reality of what is a billionaire, of what is money, of what is blackness. And I think that's starting to happen now, is this informational campaign that confronts race for black folks and white folks. See, a lot of black folks knew they was brown, knew they was living in ghettos, but before Breaking Brown, Tone Talks, and ADOS, didn't know that they were shut out. I mean, the degree of it. So I believe one of the things you gotta do with spells and magic is show some reality. I've been watching movies, and sometimes they use a little fire, and that heat gets Indiana Jones out of his magic. Well, the heat is the reality of you driving Uber in Louisville at the ADOS conference. The heat is the reality of what 2.6% of the wealth actually buys. And I think that reality, that informational campaign is part of how we do.
Thank you. Dr. Cosby, your question is this. I am 13 years old. My question is, how would this talk about our topics we have talked about and are going to talk about play a part in schools that are black and the true history from us as ADOS kids? I'm asking on behalf of my friends and myself, so thinking about how to bring this conversation into schools.
Great question.
I think it's incumbent upon our elected school board representatives to make sure that that American history has been dipped in chocolate. and that the true story of the American experience is taking place. Also, I think that one of the roles of Black institutions is to unapologetically teach our story. I think that when most people think about Sunday school, for example, historically, Sunday school started because Black people wanted to be literate. In 1865, only 5% of the 4 million slaves were literate. By 1915, 50 years later, 75% of them were literate. And they were able to increase their literacy because their churches taught practical skills, taught people how to read and write. And I think we have to rethink what we do on Sunday, for example, in terms of our Sunday school classes. And I think that we have to develop a liberation theology, a Black theology that is not dependent upon the culture to educate our people, but we've got to do it in our churches, in our institutions.
So a follow-up to that, so you're suggesting that the other Black institutions, some of which you mentioned in your presentation, like Black media, Black family, as well as Black churches, take more of a leadership role in educating as well as educating in the public schools?
3 C's: consciousness, concerns, controls. It is the primary purpose of Black institutions to infuse consciousness in Black people. So it's inexcusable. You just don't know what you don't know. But when you've got someone like Yvette and Tone and we're listening in, then we got to find a way to incorporate this into our institutions and to make, for example, the curriculum of our Sunday schools reflect the concerns of ADOS. Thank you.
Josh, a question for you. Who do you believe is most confused about racism and white supremacy? White people or Black non-white people? And explain. A little provocative question there. Who do you believe is most confused about racism and white supremacy? White people or Black people?
Well, even, I mean, there's some generalizations there, right? So I think there are some big differences with white people in terms of class and geography. So I don't think white wealthy people are really confused at all. And I think that's really the problem. I don't think the billionaire class is confused. I don't think the ownership class is confused. I think poor white people might be confused because I think they've been duped for a long time. And I think that was built into capitalism. I don't think capitalism exists without racism. I think you have to have racism to justify capitalism because you have to have low wages. And I think poor white people have sort of been convinced, really through the invention of whiteness, that they are superior. It's what Du Bois called a mental wage, right? So that broke down solidarity between those two groups. So I think they're very confused. But I don't think among wealthy white people, I don't think they're confused at all. I think what you have with the white middle class and white upper middle class is sort of what Toni Morrison talked about, that they need white supremacy, right? When she did that interview with Charlie Rose, she said, are you any good at what you do? What are you without white supremacy, right? Are you good? You know, and I think that's the question a lot of mediocre white people need to ask themselves, like, you know, are you comfortable just floating on the sea of unearned privilege or unearned wealth? Or are you willing to step outside that and really stand next to somebody based on your skills and your merit? And that's the question.
Could you add one more component to that? Because what I've found is when I'm educating in white spaces about the role of Christianity in sustaining enslavement and racism, that they have been intentionally miseducated and not taught things, and in their ignorance then the system sustains itself. Do you see that when you're doing that?
I think it's a cop-out. I think white fragility is in service to white supremacy. So when you tell white people, I spend a lot of time telling white people things they don't want to hear, and there's a lot of pearl clutching that goes on in those spaces. But we have to realize that that is a functionality of white supremacy. That's a form of soft power, right? And we have to call that out as soft power. And that white fragility can spread so quickly. It's like a flame if you give it oxygen. You know, all of a sudden you're talking about systemic racism, and now you have to console someone because they're crying in the corner. So it's a way of shifting the focus away from, so we don't ever want, I don't ever want to be a part of elevating someone else's discomfort over another group's oppression. So I think we have to handle that in a very strategic way.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to do one more round of questions, and we're going to begin with Yvette. Voting down ballot as a Democrat will possibly put them in power in the Senate and Congress. There's a but here. But why should we vote them in those seats when they wield the power to pass votes to give illegal rights to vote, just like the House passed a law a few months back to give illegals the right to obtain a driver's license in their state, because we're still under his gavel, the gavel of Nancy Pelosi.
Well, I think you have to look, when I say down ballot, what I'm talking about is voting down ballot Democrat. Somebody's asking if I understand you right. Well, you're still going to give Nancy Pelosi the gavel, like you're still helping her. This is where I think you have to become very much involved in your local politics. Not all politics are the same. So if you're looking at a local politician, if you're looking at your lawmaker, and your lawmaker is doing a lot of stuff that you disagree with, and it's like, you know how we saw the video where we have JD chasing people? If that's your lawmaker, and if your lawmaker is behaving that way, then okay, no, you don't do it. You don't do it. Then you go further down. Your state lawmaker, you go all of them. You can't just, see, here's the thing, and this is why, when I say, this is why I don't believe in Messiah leadership. I'm not telling you, because Nancy Pelosi ain't doing anything for all the blacks in San Francisco who have been locked out of housing, and you want to get over here and just tell me all we got to do is just take care of Trump. We don't have to take care of the black agenda, an ADOS agenda. You have to look at your individual lawmaker. You have to look at who you're voting for. You know enough. We know enough. We know enough. We've been doing enough political education to know whether our lawmaker, whatever state you're in, and if you don't know enough, now's the time to do it. But you have enough to make an assessment of that person and decide whether or not that person has an ADOS agenda, to decide whether or not that person, when we watched that video, we saw Beto O'Rourke at least engage, and his staff allowed him to engage. We saw a lot of people, we saw Kamala just run and jump in the back of the truck and then yell something out. No. What about the bill? Slam it up. What's that? So we know enough to know that we know how to make assessments. So when it comes time to look at who you're sending, I'm not telling you got to necessarily vote for that person. I'm just giving you a framework. When you look at that person and you see somebody who's running scared from our issues, or telling us they're not going to do anything, or they're not involved, or it doesn't matter, or yeah, it does not come to this conference, or it's not going to matter this turnaround, or like Ben Jones, you got to take one for the team, you got to take one for the team, and maybe you get it next go round. If that is your lawmaker, then I don't think you can vote for that person. But you have to make that assessment. You know, you have to. Georgia is not California, is not New York, is not Michigan, is not Wisconsin, is not Idaho. That's where doing political education comes into play, and being able to make that assessment of that lawmaker, look at what their budget is, and look at that demographic. If your demographic is mostly ADOS issues, and you see that person on the news, on the Twitter feed, advocating a whole bunch of stuff that ain't got nothing to do with you, and then you show up and advocate, and they say, we're gonna talk about it. We saw how Terry Sewell did with the hookworm, black people in Alabama living in third world conditions, and all she's talking about is DACA this and DACA that, and standing beside Nancy Pelosi for the camera. You have to be able to make that individual assessment of your lawmaker. Because we all have to be able to sleep at night, and we all have to be able to know that we're going to take care of our families and do what we're doing politically. You have to make that assessment, and you can get together with your breaking ground chaplain and make that assessment together and show up at the office and make appointments together. But I'm not telling that you got to vote for that person. I'm absolutely not saying that.
Thank you, man. Next question. I know you've heard the argument that says if black people get money, the money will immediately go to Cadillacs, chicken sandwiches. When we really need to buy, what we really need to buy is economic, cultural, historical, physical health for our ADOS people. How will a feasible reparations plan accomplish this and avoid the pitfalls of miseducated spending? So let me focus it. Must there be dedicated phases of emotional and intellectual healing before disbursement of funds in general? It's a lot. It's a lot.
No, I mean, the core thematic of that question is flawed. Now, I did a report with Professor Sandy Darity, who's watching now. What's up, Darity? He could be here. Essentially, what we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. It got shared around, everybody from Roland Martin to Mark, I believe it was Al Sharpton, they was on stage with printed copies, talking, didn't know what they were talking about though. And I say this to the question, which is, we haven't spent our money on chicken and Cadillacs, and we ain't had no money. I say this to the question that when you look at the mythology around home ownership, we forget that you need money to buy a home. It isn't the fact that once we get these homes, all of a sudden they become less valuable because we're inside of them. Until you deconstruct and reconstruct race, until you protect the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and make it work for black people the way it was supposed to work for black people, because it was forgotten for all these years. It was there, but it wasn't being used to open the doorways for us as it was meant to. So I say this to that question, that it poses a false narrative about black folks that we don't know how to spend money. That I can't give Dr. Cosby $1 billion without strings, without him going out and getting some gold tip shoes. But I'll tell you this, what Dr. Cosby did with this conference, puts to bed that mythology. When you look at this conference, and I want to take a moment, I'm sorry, because I'm going to use this. When you look at this man here, please stand over here.
All right.
His staff, his church, see, like, take first of this sanctuary. In 30 years, no one has ever eaten in this sanctuary. If we had 1,700 people, he was gonna let y'all eat in the sanctuary for the first time ever, but we didn't have to do that. So I'm saying this to say, what we see is that you can give us money without strings, and we will not use the money wrong. We're gonna use it to throw the ADOS stuff. So my answer to that question, I guess, ultimately is that reparations, as it's framed in that question, does a disrespect to reparations. When you understand what I'm talking about a transformation of society, not money. The only reason I'm talking about money is to make it and put it in a framework where you can kind of grasp it. But what it is a transition of a black underclass to an elite status. It's taking a group that has been designated as the bottom and bringing them to the top, and you figure out how that works. Now, I'll tell you right now, ain't no, whatever Yarmouth was talking about gonna do it. I'll tell you now that $400 billion is not gonna do that. What does it is trillions of dollars, only because the only way you get there is transformative government. The only way we can get trillions of dollars to be given to a group that literally is worth billions of dollars, hold on, is by giving them ownership in things. See, that's what they don't want to deal with. So even when Mary Ann says, well, I need to do what's politically feasible, well, that's not reparations. See, for you to give us $7, $8 trillion, it would require you to give us land. It would require you to give us telecommunications. You can't spend telecommunications on chicken and Cadillacs.
That's right. That's right.
That's what we want.
Thank you, Antonio. Dr. Cosby, your question is, how can we win allies among other blacks that are not ADOS?
Well, they need to come to us.
How can we win allies among other blacks that aren't on board with ADOS?
Well, I think that my sister, this brilliant Serena, is a prime example. She's the answer to that question. I think that we have to continue to challenge them not to engage in identity theft. In the Bible, the book of Matthew opens
What they
up
do?
Oh, Lord.
with lineage.
Come on now.
It opens up with the genealogy of Jesus, tracing him through David all the way to Abraham.
Amen.
And his legitimacy is through his lineage. That's biblical. Our legitimacy is through our lineage. And I think that the best way that we can develop partners is, first of all, I think that we have to partner among ourselves first. And then as a result of partnering among ourselves, I think then that we have to continue to challenge people who look like us. As I said earlier, who have our pigmentation, we don't have our identification. And the true test, if they're going to be our allies and help us to advance our unique justice claims, and as Tone and Yvette have said, and when it's time for them to advance their justice claims against the colonial powers that oppress them, then we will be their allies and not try to steal what rightfully belongs to them.
Thank you. Last question for Josh. What book can you recommend to white people so that they can see with their own eyes that government has fully sponsored their achievements?
Well, it's going to take more than one book.
They got the Bible.
Books.
A book I don't recommend is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. I think more books are coming out by people who did more of a deep dive into that research. I would say Cedric Robinson, but that's probably too radical. The book I go back to a lot is The Color of Money by Mercer Bergeron. I think with really framing the terms, really framing like the economic implications of white supremacy. I think that's the book I go to. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Where do we go from here? There are a lot of books, but the one that I recommend right now is Mercer Bergeron's book. But going back to this question of education, because we have to be careful how we identify our theories of change. And so a lot of times, and I've been through this space, I thought for a lot of times, for a long time, that this was a question of white people just not knowing. And then we would get with white people and without explain things to them, but they didn't do anything different, right? So J.P. Morgan came to town last year and gave a $3 million donation to the city of Louisville, to nonprofits here, for financial literacy programs in West Louisville. And it's amazing how much money J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo are pumping into black neighborhoods right now, all based around financial literacy classes, right? So their theory of change is that black people don't know how to manage the 3 pennies that they have, right? So there's a problem there, but how much, and tell me, how much money is Jamie Dimon worth? Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase? At least $30 billion, right? So they come to town and make a $3 million donation, and we're celebrating that. Like, that's a big deal. We've got data that shows that strong HBCUs increase black earnings. Simmons College didn't get a dime of that $3 million. It all went to white-led organizations, mostly around individual level impact around financial literacy. So it's going to take building power to really change the way philanthropic dollars flow in and out. It's going to take a lot more than just educating people like Jamie Dimon. And if we were able to educate Jamie Dimon today that we need reparations, the board would just replace him tomorrow. So it's going to take a lot more. It's going to take building political, like Yvette said, it's going to take political organizing on a large scale.
Thank you. As we conclude, I would like for us to recognize and celebrate Antonio, Yvette, and Dr. Cosby before we clap, for creativity and courage. Because they bring the best of their mind, their heart, what the biblical tradition calls pathos. It's that inner fire that drives you. And in a time where leaders are feeling so much pressure to sit down and to be quiet and to hide and to cower in fear, you all are relentless and courageous. Thank you all for your leadership.
All right.
Come on, let's thank you.
I appreciate that. We appreciate that. Do not forget that as we exit out of here, that the meet and greet is under the tent on the field across the street. Right over there. Yep, right there. Also, do not forget, as Antonio said, there are shirts, like 40 shirts for sale still. Keep your wristband for tomorrow, so do not lose that. Keep that, please. And is there anything else? That's it. Okay. Dr. Cos?
You're not a reverend.
Let us pray together. Our Lord, nothing happens by accident. Everything happens because of your providence and your divine hand orchestrated. So often when we look at the pain of ADOS, we ask, my God, where is God? And now we know where you are. You are present through your people. You are present through the burden and passion of Yvette Carnell and the data of Antonio Moore. And you're present through us as we become your agents and instruments of world and community transformation. Thank you for this historic conference that will go down in the annals of history, like the Niagara movement, like the political movement in Gary, Indiana in the early 70s. This will go down as a historic movement, and we don't know what may emerge from this. So we thank you for allowing us to be a part of this. Be with us, and now that we've got some good information, help us to enjoy each other's presence with good inspiration. Help us, oh God, to be brothers and sisters to one another, to encourage each other, because this is a difficult struggle. Be with us and bless this time of sharing, and visit us again tomorrow, that we might go to a new level as we reconvene tomorrow. And we ask this prayer in the name of Denmark Vesey and Gabriel Prosser, Harriet Tubman, Martin King, and El Haj Malik El Shabazz, and Ida Mae Wells, and Fannie Lou Hamer. We ask this prayer in the name of the ADOS from Nazareth, even